Yes. Has he been in touch with you?
He said he wants to interview.
Yes, yes. It's a lovely chat.
I said yes, I'll hold it.
No, I'm not going to argue with anybody today. Yeah, let's go.
Down with the sun and in the morning. We will remember them.
We will remember them.
Our first of two groups to march on is of course the 356 Felixstowe ATC Squadron, and they're of course going to march on to the Royal Air Force March. Thank you.
You okay there?
Our second group to march on is the Kesgrave Parachute Detachment, the Suffolk Army Cadet Force. Now they're going to march on to a piece of music. I'm not even going to tell you because you'll instantly recognise it. So thank you. Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Our service this afternoon is being taken by Reverend Tate, standing here beside me. I'm not going to tell you that he's the new vicar because he's probably fed up of hearing that, but this is his first time at one of our services, so welcome Reverend Tate. Also taking part this afternoon in our service is a gentleman who's come probably the furthest of any of us, and that's Preston Easley Jr. I'll say Junior because his father was here during the war of the same name. But Preston And Pat, wherever she is, welcome to England, and thanks very much for coming here this afternoon. President of the Martlesham Heath Aviation Society, of course, Mr. Richard Barker. Thank you, Richard, for having the memorials cleaned and for your wonderful donation handed to me today. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent, lovely. The 356 ATC, thanks very much for coming. Smart as usual. Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. And of course the Kesgrave Parachute Suffolk Army Cadet Force. Thank you for coming along as well. And you've had to judge in there with the bike, so well done for that. Right, representing the RAF, of course, is our friend. We can call him a friend now, he's been coming for several years. That's Wing Commander Phil Nicholson, and is accompanied by his wife this year, Kelly. So welcome, Kelly, to Martlesham Heath. We hope you enjoyed the service. Representing the USIF is Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Renkin, and he would have been accompanied by his wife, but his triplets, that's their birthday today, so we're very pleased that he's taken the time to come out here today, but he's going to rush back afterwards for the triplets' birthday party. They're 5 years old. I told him he's probably better off here than he is at the birthday party. But anyway, welcome, welcome Jeremy, and nice to see you here this afternoon. Representing the National League of Prisoners of War and Missing in Action families is Bob Hale. Now, Bob Hale is associated with the Cold War Museum at Bentwaters. It's a US organisation that he's representing this afternoon, and you'll find out for what reason later on. We're also pleased to welcome the Assistant Chief Constable, Rachel Kearton. Nice to have you here this afternoon, Rachel. Right, who have we got next? Mr. Andrew Hunt. Andrew is representing the landlords of the industrial site, Logicor. So welcome, Andrew, and thank you very much for the donation that Logicor made. I shall catch sight of you in a minute, yes. So many dignitaries. But thanks very much for that as well. Royal British Legion, of course. You couldn't have a service like this without the Royal British Legion. The RAFA Association, and I'm not certain whether there are any Aircrew Association, which included the Air Gunners. If any of you are here this afternoon, lovely to see you. The Iron Crows, of course, who support the Royal British Legion, are down here as usual, and they're joined this year by the Black Shooks. Now, some of you won't know quite anything about the Black Shooks, but it's this mysterious black dog that roams Suffolk at the dead of night. So that's the Black Shooks, and we welcome them here this afternoon. And behind me is Rod Caird, Ipswich Piping Society. Thanks, Rod, for coming along this afternoon. Crane me neck round to see you. Excellent. And the first Martlesham Scouts and the Martlesham Guides and Rangers, all up at the end there. Thank you for coming.
A very warm welcome to each and every one of you, to our guests, ladies and gentlemen, and to the young and not so young. Welcome to this service of remembrance on this Barrett Square and before the memorials that are facing you and they're behind me. And I thought that I would just take this opportunity of giving you some of my reflections upon those memorials. 3 memorials behind me and in front of you. And first I would begin with the memorial which is in the centre, which pays tribute to the extraordinary contribution that RAF Martlesham Heath has played in the research and development of all aspects of military aviation for so many years. Indeed, at one time, the services regarded Martlesham Heath, the airfield here, as the most important of all the airfields under their control because of this most valuable work. On each side of the central memorial are, of course, the 2 memorials which pay tribute and honour to so many who sacrificed so much in the last World War in service of Martlesham Heath. whether that sacrifice occurred in the air or on the ground when this airfield was bombed. We shall remember them. And in doing so, we remember the families of those who lost their lives and those who suffered mental and physical injuries, and who were sustained and supported by the love and companionship that families may bring. These memorials allow us, each in our own way, privately and publicly, to honour and pay tribute to the sacrifices of those who in the last World War were fighting an evil tyranny, and to those who today continue to confront evil. These memorials are timeless. We shall remember them. The memorial to your left was the first memorial erected in Europe to the honour and in tribute to the men and women from the United States of America who stood with us and fought side by side with us. We shall remember them. The memorial to your right acknowledges the contribution that so many, from so many parts of the world, have made to the history of this remarkable place, both in terms of the research and development that I mentioned earlier, and also to the war effort. And we shall remember them. These memorials stand together, and I believe they show us that when we need to confront and overcome an evil, that can better be achieved by standing together in common cause. And I would like to end this short address by reference to the Martlesham Heath Aviation Society. The Society is a custodian of the history of this most remarkable place, and also of these memorials. And the dedication, the sheer enthusiasm for this cause, and the downright hard work that they put in throughout the year, organising so many events, brings that history alive and increases the understanding of the young and the not so young, of the sacrifices and of the achievements that have occurred in this place. Thank you.
My name is Preston Easley Jr. My father was Captain Preston Easley Sr. and I'm here to represent him and the men of the 356 Fighter Group, and particularly the 72 members of the 356 Fighter Group that didn't make it out of the war alive and gave the ultimate sacrifice. My father graduated from West Point in June of 1943. They had accelerated classes during the war. He then taught flying for a year. In mid-1944, he was stationed here at RAF Martlesham Heath, beginning with the 359th Fighter Squadron. There were 3 fighter squadrons, 359, 360, and 361. He then transferred to the 360th Fighter Group. He was here for the last year of the war, and those first 6 months of the last year he flew the P-47 Thunderbolt, which lacked the range to escort the bombers over Germany. In December of 1944 came the advent of the P-51 Mustang, which changed the tide of the war, and he and the entire fighter group began flying the P-51 Mustangs, and he flew the P-51 Mustang out of the 360th Fighter Group until the end of the war. I'd like to give a couple of thanks Beyond that, first of all, the Martlesham Heath Aviation Society. I was here 16 years ago when they opened the air control tower as a museum, the upstairs. The downstairs was a nursery school. My family donated some of my dad's possessions from the war for the museum. At that time, we had no idea if the museum would survive or not. And over time, they reconstructed the cupola on the roof. They restored the signal square next to the tower. They've now restored the walls that run behind the tower. They've taken over the downstairs. There's a diorama of the history of the base in this diorama now. So more has happened with that museum that I could even describe just standing up in front of you here today. But the time, energy, and effort that has gone into replacing the stairway from the balcony to the roof to the cupola to the numbers on the cupola that would tell the pilots which runway to land on, they have brought it back to life. And it is a fantastic thing. I never thought it would get this far. I never thought it would last this long. And so to the Martlesham Heath Aviation Society and the people of Ipswich and Martlesham, I am eternally grateful to all of you for keeping the memory of the 356 Fighter Group alive. Hopefully, at further ceremonies like this, maybe some more of the sons of the pilots will participate in the ceremonies, further cementing the bonds between the United Kingdom and the United States. But I am humbled by all that you have done.
Thank you very much, Preston. And we're pleased to see you back here. Right, Wing Commander Phil Nicholson.
This year marks the 100th centenary of the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest in the entire history of mankind. It lasted for 141 days. At the end of it, the Allies had gained 7 miles at a cost of 300,000 dead and 1 million casualties. The people who fought there and in other battles didn't want to fight and die in the mud of northern France. They didn't go because they loved fighting. They volunteered for a cause that was greater than themselves. They went to protect their way of life and their nation. They came from many walks of life, but they shared several qualities: dedication, duty, selflessness, and ultimately a willingness to lay down their lives. Many of them knew each other because in Britain, Pals battalions had been formed. It was felt that if people knew the people they were fighting with, it would be better for morale. So these battalions were formed from local recruiting drives. One such battalion was the Accrington Pals. Accrington is a small mill town in Lancashire. The Accrington Pals consisted of 720 men who went over the top on day 1 of the Somme. On that day alone, 584 became casualties. An entire community lost a generation of its young men. It is right that we stop to remember them and their sacrifice. Your presence here today shows our mutual respect for the fallen of both the UK and the US, and it's fitting given the long and enduring nature of our relationship and the partnership between us fighting side by side, lasting 100 years and still in evidence today in Iraq and Syria. And it's particularly fitting here as it shows our respect for the United States Air Force and the close relationship that East Anglia has with it. Standing before the memorial, the 72 Americans who gave their lives whilst at Martlesham, it helps one reflect on the debt that we owe to these people who also died so far from home to defend freedom. And this is a mere fraction of the British, Commonwealth and American dead who lay buried across the world. The human cost of our willingness to defend ourselves and those weaker than ourselves. The relative prosperity and peace that we enjoy today is in no small part due to the bravery of the men and women who are prepared to give their lives to protect our way of life.
He could be here. Unfortunately, NATO duty has called him away, so he sent his best substitute that he could. It is to both remember a solemn past and for the hope of an enlightened future that we gather here freely beneath God's beautiful elements and before man's monuments. To remember those who defended humans from tyrannic injustice, who gave victory to ideas that our civilizations cherish as right and good, and by whose exertions not only our freedoms were defended, but also the hope of freedom-loving people around the world. Certainly your memories are more connected in geography and in many cases in generations than are mine, but I am honored to daily take to the same skies once dominated by warriors like Sir Douglas Bader, Mr. Preston Easley Sr., Captain Preston Easley Sr., and Lieutenant Ben Barnes, who, through the efforts of your diligence and really just goodness and compassion, I will say that as a fighter pilot, it means a lot to me to know that even if it takes 7 decades, you'll bring them home. We honor the aviation heroes of World War II who fought on in spite of incredible odds and the daily reminders of combat's bloody toll. We also honor those who fought on in the aftermath when a war-weary world had to defend itself again from a new threat of communist aggression. We honor the fact that our nations stood with iron resolve and with the constant readiness of our veterans to keep the peace of a war kept cold.
Ben Barnes, he was with the 361st Fighter Squadron here on Martlesham Heath, the 356th Fighter Group, and he was killed in action on the 5th of December 1944. Ben was born in 1921 in Miller, South Dakota, an only child. After leaving school, he attended West Point as a cadet. Jim Jones, a long-term board member of the GIR Cemetery in Miller, said his mother recalled Barnes, who while training as a fighter pilot would let friends know when he was flying, and on occasions would buzz his old school and the town to the delight of the young students who crowded against the windows to watch. In 1944, shortly before leaving for England, Ben married. He married Clara Amelia Lumley in Miller, South Dakota, and Clara was one of the first female licensed pilots in South Dakota. Lieutenant Barnes was assigned to the 361st Fighter Squadron, 356th, and came to RAF Martlesham Heath in 1944. He flew 23 missions, a total of 90 hours before being killed. He first flew the P-47 Thunderbolts, and later, of course, the P-51 Mustang. On the 5th of December 1944, Lieutenant Barnes was part of a US bombing escort to the northeast of Berlin. Taking off on that day from RAF Martlesham Heath were 69 P-51s, made up from all 3 fighter squadrons. They rendezvoused at 9:41 near Egmond, and following the bomb run, a group of 40 to 60 Focke-Wulf 190s were spotted and began chasing. According to a report by 2nd Lieutenant John Lindsay, who was Barnes' wingman, while chasing them around, 5 German fighters jumped them from behind, and Lindsay lost sight of Lieutenant Barnes in the ensuing dogfight. The casualties on that day were 13 German kills the Americans lost 5 P-51s. Captain Jean Tarboton of the 359th was shot down but managed to bail out. The other 4 were last seen chasing the Focke-Wulfs near Eberswalde. First Lieutenant Russell Scharnberg of the 359th was reported missing in action. Captain Raymond Gransberg, 361st, shot down and reported killed in action. And Second Lieutenant Jack Smith, who was only on his 2nd mission, was shot down and killed in action. And of course, First Lieutenant Ben Barnes, the 361st, who was reported as missing in action. Clara learnt a few weeks after Ben's crash that he was listed as missing in action. On the 6th of December 1945, a year and a day after Ben was killed, she received a letter from Major General Edward Witzel. The letter presumed that Lieutenant Ben Barnes was dead. There was no crash site, much less a body, and with the crash site located behind the Iron Curtain, it precluded any search. Lieutenant Colonel David Fossum, assigned to the South Dakota Army National Guard, said, and I quote, "The Russians wouldn't let us in." Clara was living at this time with her parents in Pierre, and after war ended she moved to Eugene in Oregon, where she met and married a World War II naval veteran, William Huggins, and they raised 5 children, and Clara died in 2005. Lieutenant Barnes remained on the missing list for decades. Ben's father died in 1956 and his mother in 1973. He was awarded 2 air medals by the time he was killed. The records do not show, however, how he earned these, although usually they were awarded to pilots surviving 25 missions. In 1953, following an eyewitness report of seeing a burning plane in a crater, German investigators researched the crash site. However, following the crash in 1944, the German troops had covered the crater up without removing anything. Based on the crash location reports, the US Army initially thought the crash site was that of Lieutenant Scharnberg's P-51. In 1958, a German researcher identified Lieutenant Scharnberg's plane. A P-51 had been pulled out of a lake in the same region where both men had gone down. The serial number of the recovered plane officially confirmed that that plane was assigned to Lieutenant Scharnberg. After the end of the Cold War, US investigators visited the original 1953 crash site. The excavation revealed 2 machine guns with serial numbers that matched those of Lieutenant Barnes. They also recovered dog tags, aviator wings and a wristwatch, along with bone fragments and 5 teeth. However, they still had to establish that this was Lieutenant Barnes. This involved locating living relatives with whom DNA samples were taken. This revealed that it was indeed the body of First Lieutenant Ben Barnes. 72 years after the disappearance of Lieutenant Barnes, his remains arrived in Miller, South Dakota, in an 18-inch box, escorted by the military. His burial was held at 2 p.m. on the 15th of October 2016 with full military honours. Although there were few remaining relatives, a large gathering saw Ben laid to rest next to the Veterans Memorial, and Bob Huggins, the son of Clara, Ben's wife, and her second husband, William Huggins.